Hello and welcome to Welty at Home. We are the slow reading virtual book club that alternates works by Eudora Welty with works by authors connected to Eudora Welty. We are currently discussing a new selection of works by Welty and others inspired by civil rights leader Medgar Evers. Today, we'll open this series by discussing Eudora Welty's short story titled Where is the Voice Coming From? I'm Jessica Russell, director of the Eudora Welty House and Garden, and we are grateful to also have Suzanne Mars, Eudora Welty's friend and biographer and professor emerita of Millsaps College, with us to guide these discussions. Just some quick housekeeping. To comment or ask a question, click the reactions button at the bottom of your screen and select raise hand. If you're on a tablet or a phone, you may have to tap the screen for this option to appear. But if I see your raise hand icon, then Suzanne and I will look for your comment, and we'll get to your comments in the order that they are clicked up for us. Also, a lively discussion takes place in the chat, so don't forget to check the chat every so often, as different participants might be making comments and sharing links and resources in the chat box every now and then. With that, Suzanne, shall we officially begin today's discussion?
Let's officially begin.
Okay.
I'm going to officially begin by recommending 3 books for background information that I think will be useful in all our sessions. The first is this book called Remembering Medgar Evers, the same title that our series has. It's by Minrose Gwynn, and it is about the responses to Evers' life and death that we have in fiction, in poetry, in memoir, and in drama. And so this is a good book, covers all the titles that we will be discussing. A second book, The Autobiography of Medgar Evers, edited by Merle Evers Williams and Manning Marable. And this book is a collection of documents, Evers' reports that he filed with the NAACP, speeches that he gave, and it tracks his life through those documents. So it's very interesting to read, and I'm going to be relying on it a good bit today. And then the third book is Medgar Evers, Mississippi Martyr by Michael Vinson Williams. It's a biography of Medgar Evers. So I'm also going to be relying on it a good bit today. So those are 3 books for you to consider if you would like to do some background reading. Let me start by talking about Medgar Evers and giving you some information about his life. He was born in Decatur, Mississippi, July 1st, 1925, to James and Jessie Evers. He was one of 6 children in his family. His parents were people who followed a pattern of social resistance to the oppressive, racist world in which they lived. They modeled that sense of defiance and of maintaining your dignity in the face of oppression for their children. They were people of faith. They were landowners. They were models for their son. One of their friends at some point in Evers' youth was murdered. It was a racially motivated murder. His name was Willie Tingle, and the murderer spread his bloody clothes on fences along the path that the children had to walk when they went to school. And so early on, an encounter with this horrible, violent form of racism. When Medgar Evers was not yet of age, he lied about his age and signed up and served in the European theater during World War II. He was in a black unit commanded by white officers, and the unit was used to bring supplies to assault troops who were engaged in battle. While he was in France, he encountered a much more open society than he was used to in Mississippi and in the United States. And in fact, he had a romance with a young French woman I think he was deeply in love with her. She was in love with him, but he knew he couldn't ask her. It would be impossible to bring her home with him, and he came home to Mississippi. He was discharged from the Army April 16th. By the way, that relationship in France was totally acceptable, and that was a revelation to him as well. He came home discharged from the Army in April of 1946, and he was determined to seek equal rights for Black Americans. In 1946, along with his brother Charles and several friends, he decided that he would register to vote. They went to do so. They were turned away by a group of white men who were armed. They decided not to press the issue because it looked as if death would be the result. But Evers left determined that he would not let this happen to him again. In the fall of 1946, he went to what is now Alcorn University, where he first finished his high school degree and then entered the college. And in 1950, he met a young woman named Merle Beasley on her first day on campus, and they were married at Christmas 1951. Evers had a distinguished career at Alcorn. He was editor of the campus newspaper and of the yearbook. He was president of the junior class. He was vice president of the student forum, and he graduated with a degree in business administration in 1952 and took a job working for Dr. Theodore Roosevelt Mason Howard, Dr. T.R.M. Howard, who was the chief surgeon at the Taborian Hospital in Mound Bayou, and who had also founded an insurance company for Black Mississippians who were being built by other insurance companies. And Evers went to work for this insurance company, the Magnolia Mutual Life Company. He in the process encountered a poverty that he had not seen before in the Mississippi Delta among sharecroppers. He began to advocate for the right to vote. He advocated for an end to police brutality, and he became the program director for the Regional Council of Negro Leadership, which Dr. Howard, who was an ardent civil rights advocate, had founded. He became more and more important in this job, and he was, let me see, what was the name of his promotion? He became agency director of the Magnolia Mutual Insurance Company. The same year that he became the director of that agency director, in 1953, his first child was born, Daryl Kenyatta Evers, named after the Kenyan freedom fighter Jomo Kenyatta. Evers began to devise other strategies for combating racism in the Delta, and one was to organize an economic boycott against gas station owners who would not let Black Mississippians use the restrooms at their gas stations. In 1953, December of 1953, he decided to challenge the segregation of the University of Mississippi Law School, and his case was eventually heard by the IHL in September 1954, and it was denied on a pretext of him not having 2 letters of recommendation from Mound Bayou, the community where he lived. He had 2 letters of recommendation, one from a white Mississippian in his hometown of Decatur, but that wasn't good enough. They sort of fiddled the rules and denied him admission. But this was the same year as Brown versus the Board of Education decision, and the NAACP and Thurgood Marshall on its behalf decided that there should be a paid position for the NAACP in Mississippi, and they offered that position to Medgar Evers, and he was appointed field secretary. As he assumed this position in January 1955, and his first goals were to recruit 2,000 new members and to fight for voter registration. He was also investigating and documenting instances of brutality, rape, murder, assault, and he sent reports to the New York City office about these incidents, which he had documented. He began to speak throughout the state as he recruited new members. And then in 1955, when Emmett Till was murdered, Evers played a crucial role in hiring an investigator and publicizing the murder. By 1958, Ebony had published an interview with Medgar Evers entitled "Why I Live in Mississippi." And in March 11th, that was the date it was published, March 11, 1958. No, sorry, I've got it wrong here. On March 11, 1958, he boarded a Trailways bus in Meridian, refused to go to the back of the bus. The police hauled him off the bus, questioned him, but they felt they couldn't prevent it because of federal regulations. He got back on, went a bit down the road. A cab came up beside the bus. The bus driver stopped. The man in the cab came in. The bus beat Evers pretty severely, got off the bus. Evers kept his seat, and the bus continued on to Jackson, where he got medical attention. This could have been brought to court, but the NAACP decided not to pursue the case given the climate in the state of Mississippi and the likelihood that it would be dismissed. By this time, Evers had developed something of a national presence, and in 1959, he spoke at gatherings in Los Angeles and in Florida. And at home, he continued to deal with the horrors of segregation, documenting them and courageously speaking out against them. His life was in danger, for sure, and had been. The horrors he documented included the murder of Reverend George Lee, the lynching of Mac Charles Parker, and the incarceration of Clyde Kennard on trumped-up charges after he applied for admission to Mississippi Southern College, which is now the University of Southern Mississippi. The final year of Evers' life showed a continuation of this courageous behavior and a move to more and more direct action against segregation. And in doing so, he was walking a tightrope between what his organization, the NAACP, deemed appropriate and the more aggressive approach that he felt was necessary. What happened in this final year? First, he supported James Meredith and the integration of the University of Mississippi. Evers offered Meredith his advice and support. He secured NAACP legal backing of Meredith's application to the university. And of course, we know the University of Mississippi was integrated, although riots and the deaths of 2 individuals happened in the fall of 1962. In Jackson, Evers and his wife joined other couples in issuing a petition for schools to be organized on a non-segregated basis. He encouraged and was part of the group that supported the boycott of the Black State Fair in October 1962. He was part of the leadership organizing a boycott of Capitol Street stores in Jackson, which began late in 1962. The NAACP youth councils, which Evers had helped to establish, Medgar Evers himself and John Salter, who was a civil rights leader and a professor at Tougaloo College, a white professor at Tougaloo College, all of these groups and individuals agreed on 4 main goals for the boycotts. They were hiring and promotion equality, integration of public spaces, use of courtesy titles toward Black peers, and service on a first-come, first-served basis in the stores. Such modest goals causing such an uproar at that time. The boycott included picketing of stores along Capitol Street. They did this without national NAACP financial support for most of the time. Now to May and the sort of series of events that ended with the death of Medgar Evers. On May 12th, 1963, Evers sent letters to city officials calling for integration and restating the 4 goals I just mentioned. On May 13th, 1963, Mayor Allen Thompson went on television arguing that Jackson was a city without racial inequality and that the NAACP representatives were outside agitators. That is, Medgar Evers of Decatur, Mississippi, was an outside agitator. Subsequently, after years in which any civil rights stories had been blocked from airing on television, the FCC ruled that Evers must be allowed time to speak. And on May 20th, 1963, he spoke for 17 minutes on WLBT television. He objected to Mayor Thompson's portrait of Jackson as a, quote, progressive, beautiful, friendly, prosperous city with an exciting future, and he set forth the hopes of Black Mississippians for change. The Black Mississippian, he declared, wants to get rid of racial segregation in Mississippi life because he knows it has not been good for him nor for the state. He knows that segregation is unconstitutional and illegal. He wants to register and vote without special handicaps imposed on him alone. He wants more jobs above the menial level in stores where he spends his money. He believes that new industries that have come to Mississippi should employ him above the laboring category. He wants the public schools desegregated so that his children can receive the best education that Mississippi has to offer. So on television, this declaration. On May 28th, 1963, 6 Tougaloo College students and John Salter began a sit-in at the Woolworth's lunch counter on Capitol Street. Groups of white Jacksonians, I think primarily high school students, attacked the protesters, hitting and kicking them, yelling insults, pouring condiments on them, spray painting them. This went on for a couple of hours before the store closed and the mob dispersed. Mayor Thompson and Black leaders then went into negotiation for about the demands that the civil rights leaders had issued, and Thompson made some concessions to them in the meeting, then promptly denied having made them afterwards. On May 30th, Lanier and Brinkley high school students walked out of school and sang freedom songs. Police circled them around the school a couple of times and then went in with billy clubs and turned dogs loose on the students. The next day, 400 to 600 students marched, and they had been sort of schooled in how to behave, what to do, how to respond to force by Evers and Salter and other leaders. And so they began to march from Ferris Street Baptist Church toward Capitol Street. And the police arrested them. They loaded them into garbage trucks, into paddy wagons, into other vehicles, and they took them to pens at the state fairgrounds where they were held. Evers compared the police response to that of stormtroopers in Nazi Germany. That evening, May 31st, 1963, 2,000 people gathered for an NAACP meeting at which Evers spoke, and he asked the crowd of 2,000, who of you is ready to march? And they all signaled that they were. Hours later, the Evers house in Jackson was firebombed. On June 1st, Evers was arrested for picketing in front of the Woolworths store. Very high bail was imposed. He was arrested along with the national NAACP director, Roy Wilkins, who now was supporting this effort. They both had very high bond, but it was posted and they were released on bail. On June 4th, Mayor Thompson finally acknowledged some concession and announced that the protests were over. Well, that was his idea, but the protesters weren't ready to stop protesting, and they organized what they called an Allen Thompson blitzkrieg. So they planned a series of small demonstrations up and down Capitol Street that would be ongoing. That first day of demonstrations, 32 people were arrested. On June 6th, Thompson secured a boycott injunction banning parades and mass demonstrations without a permit. On June 7th, a gathering of 2,500 people saw Lena Horne and Dick Gregory speak. They were celebrities at this fundraising event for the Jackson movement. On June 9th, Sunday, the demonstrators held pray-ins at 5 Jackson churches. On June 11th, Evers met with fellow Mississippi civil rights leader Aaron Henry. This is the day before he's killed, June 11th. He had a busy day. He met with Aaron Henry, his fellow civil rights leader, to coordinate the testimony that they were scheduled to give on June 12th for the House Judiciary Committee in Washington, D.C. And later, he watched President Kennedy's address on civil rights that day, June 11th. And afterwards, he met with fellow activists to go over the day's events. He drove Aaron Henry to the airport and gave Henry a copy of his own speech so that he would have it there in Washington with him. He provided students with ways to get home after the meeting. He went to the home of his lawyer to talk about what was going on. He ferried a national NAACP leader about Jackson, and then finally, after midnight, he went home. About 12:20 on June 12th, he arrived in his driveway, got out of his car, opened the trunk, and this was not his usual practice. The usual practice was to get out on the passenger side of the car and go straight in the door, which was in the side of the Evers house. They didn't have really a front door. The front door was in the carport for security reasons. Anyway, tragically, he got out of the car to retrieve some T-shirts and some papers on which he was working. And as he stood there, he was shot in the back from across the street. His wife and his children, who had been allowed to wait up for their father, came out of the house to find him. He had struggled toward the front door before collapsing. It just seemed that things were cascading toward this horrible event. He had a premonition of what was coming, and horribly it proved right. Let me talk a little bit about Eudora Welty and her response to this event. In that fraught spring before Evers' assassination, Welty demonstrated her support for integration. On April 18th, just before she was scheduled to address the Southern Literary Festival, which was meeting at Millsaps College, officials from Millsaps called upon her. They had an official policy of segregation. They had a week earlier turned away a group from Tougaloo College who wanted to attend a play at Millsaps. And now they knew that another group from Tougaloo was coming to the Southern Literary Festival. So they came to, but it was a Southern Literary Festival, not a Millsaps event. So they came to Eudora and they said, we think if this goes forward, if we allow the Tougaloo people to come, we could have conflict. would you be okay if we closed the event? And she said, no, she would not. It should be open for everyone. And it was. And that night, she read from a lecture called Words into Fiction. It's now published as an essay. And after she finished that, she read her story, Powerhouse. In the audience were John Salter, Edwin King, and a group of Tougaloo students, including Anne Moody. They were tremendously grateful for this event. Here's what Salter said. Eudora Welty gave an excellent lecture, including a reading of one of her short stories, which we could follow as she read since we had brought along several copies of her work. When the evening was over, we walked slowly outside. A group of Millsap students came up and indicated that they were quite glad that we had attended. Other than that, no one appeared to notice us, and that, in its own small way, marked a significant breakthrough in Mississippi. Welty's presentation also won her the ongoing respect of Reverend Edwin King and of the Tougaloo students. Anne Moody, in a February 1985 appearance at Millsaps College, recalled how important it was for her to hear Welty read. So we had a hopeful moment in Mississippi in April 1963, a moment followed by a horrible, terrible tragedy. And here is what Eudora Welty said about the assassination. This is from the introduction to her collected stories. That hot August night, when Medgar Evers, the local civil rights leader, was shot down from behind in Jackson, I thought with overwhelming directness, whoever the murderer is, I know him. Not his identity, but his coming about in this time and place. That is, I ought to have learned by now from here what such a man, intent on such a deed, had going on in his mind. I wrote his story, my fiction, in the first person, about that character's point of view. In the first person. About that character's point of view, I felt through my shock and revolt, I could make no mistake. The story pushed its way up through a long novel, one we've read in this group, Losing Battles, pushed its way up through a long novel I was in the middle of writing, and was finished on the same night the shooting had taken place. The same night the shooting had taken place is accurate, actually, because the shooting took place in the night, but just after midnight on June 12th, and she wrote the story later on June 12th. Some newspapers reported it on June 12th. Others didn't report it till June 13th, but the radio and television had reports later in the day. So as soon as Welty heard the news, she began to write the short story. Welty's agent then sent the story to the New Yorker, which immediately accepted it, but it had to be revised because she wrote the story before anyone had been arrested for the crime. And once Byron de la Beckwith was arrested, the New Yorker legal department wanted to be sure that there were no references in the story that could prejudice the trial. So they went through it with a fine-tooth comb. Delta Drive in Jackson, the name of Delta Drive was changed to Nathan B. Forrest Road. Medgar Evers' name was changed to Roland Summers. Let's see. Oh, there was a bootlegger in Mississippi, a horrible racist named Red Heydrich. His name was changed to Goat Dykeman. Changes like that were made so as not to prejudice the story. In 1972, Welty told Linda Kuehl, an interviewer for the Paris Review, when that murder was committed, it suddenly crossed my consciousness that I knew what was in that man's mind because I lived all my life where it happened. It was the strangest feeling of horror and compulsion all in one. I tried to write from the interior of my own South, and that's why I dared to put it in the first person. I was like a real-life detective trying to discover who did it. I don't mean the name of the murderer, but his nature. Anyway, as events went to prove, I think I came close to pinpointing the mind, but I went a bit wide of the mark in placing the social background of the person arrested for it. A friend of mine said, "You thought it was a Snopes, but it was a Compson." However, in some ways, that isn't a very lasting distinction anymore. I think if it was a Compson, it was Jason Compson, for sure. In 1970, when Losing Battles was published, Walter Clemens came to Jackson to interview Eudora Welty, and he wrote this about it. He quotes her, telling him that a reporter had called her up when she published the story, when it came out in the New Yorker on July 6th, 1963. She said, a reporter had called her. "Had anybody burned a cross on my lawn?" he wanted to know. I told him, no, of course not. And he wanted to know if he could call back in a few days in case anything develops. I told him I couldn't see any sense in his running up his phone bill. The people who burn crosses on lawns don't read me in the New Yorker. Really, people don't know the first thing about the South. I think it was braver than she allows. They may not read the New Yorker, but they may hear about what was been in the New Yorker. When Beckwith was finally convicted in 1994, Welty spoke to a local reporter, Leslie Myers, and said this. She asked her, "What's your response?" "I'm glad something is finally done. I'm glad of the trial, and I'm glad of the verdict." And then Myers said to her, "I guess Beckwith reminds everybody again of Mississippi's grim past," to which Welty responded, "Just be glad Mississippi also does produce a Medgar Evers." So let's talk about this story based on Medgar Evers, but it is a story. It's a story Welty chose to tell in the voice of an assassin who uses racist and hate-filled language, which I hope we can avoid repeating, and I hope you can take care in your own reading of that. All right, let's talk about why tell this story. So she hears about the assassination. She hears that he has been murdered in his own yard, his own driveway, his wife and children coming out to discover him, and she's horrified, and she writes this story, but she writes it in the first person. Why do you think? What's the advantage of doing that? Or is there an advantage in doing that? Anyone want to venture a comment? Yes, Mr. Kennedy.
Well, it seems to me that, she knows these people very well, and she can tell that story from their point of view. And as you were reciting that, I was remembering back to my youth in the 1970 era, plus or minus, and I knew people like the Beckwith. I guess the Beckwith, is that the right name? Like that character. And it sounds a whole lot like those people. So I think it's a very authentic voice that she's able to use, because she knows those people. And it was really an amazing story, and pretty troubling in my memory. Thank you.
So yeah, so this is the world in which she's grown up. She has heard people using language like this. I don't think it would have been used among her set of friends, but you can't live in this society without hearing it. And so the authenticity of it. Yeah, Susan, what did you think?
Yeah, I think what Gilbert just said is really good. The other thing is that when you use a first person narration, we are in the head of that character too. So we become complicit. I mean, we're looking at the world from his point of view. so she doesn't let us distance ourselves from the story that she's telling.
I think that's exactly right. Eudora Welty, when she became a good friend of Ross MacDonald, the mystery novelist, she was helping him compile an anthology of mysteries, and she sent him a story called The Walker. And in this story, it has an unreliable narrator who is a murderer. And we don't know it until the very final pages of the story. And Ross MacDonald wrote to her about this story, and he said, "That story you sent me is just about the most frightening thing I've ever read, the more so that its ending has a dreadful subjective quality, the reader having been gradually betrayed into complicity." That's Susan's word, and it was Ross MacDonald's words about this story. The reader having been betrayed into complicity. So it's a way of indicting the reader as well, because you're listening to this account, you're in the mind of the narrator, you're betrayed into complicity, and the horror of that is, the rejection of that point of view. I think the denunciation of it, and a call for change, call for social change. Yeah, Beverly. Oh, we can't hear you, Beverly. I want to hear you. I'll go to Adrian and come back to you. Adrian.
My internet has been weird too, so let me know if I'm also freezing up. I think, yeah, what y'all say is very true and very powerful in the story in terms of drawing the reader in. The title itself, I think, underscores that, like, where is the voice coming from? I do wonder, like, at what it seems there is kind of a tension there, because when you're talking about it indicting the reader, but like then you're thinking about her literal audience, it just makes me think of her comment when someone was like, "Aren't you afraid of getting a cross burned on your lawn?" And the very funny and very true in its way comment, "No, the people who burn crosses on lawn don't read me in the New Yorker. Don't these people know the first thing about the South?" So then, like, her audience is the New Yorker, so like there's that distancing of the audience while also drawing the audience in, and I don't have a good solution there, but it just made me think of it in terms of like the specific audience.
Yeah, that is a kind of unfortunate irony. But I was going to say too, the other, where is the voice coming from? I think in a sense that the reader is the person who is hearing the confession. So maybe you're not identifying with the speaker, but you're hearing his confession. And as you listen to that confession, whether you're a reader of the New Yorker or not, you're probably somebody who hasn't done enough to address the situation. And you, as you listen to this confession, if you don't do something, you are complicit, I think. So there's that sort of suggestion. Yeah, Beverly. Oops, still can't hear you.
Beverly, if you put your comment in the chat, I'll read it to the group if you'd like to do that.
All right. So anything else about this whole question of complicity? Let me say the other thing I was going to say to Adrian is, I think Eudora's funny comment about the people who read me in the New Yorker, that doesn't mean, well, it does mean that the people who are reading the story are probably not the most culpable. But I think what Welty is saying is those of us who read the New Yorker are also culpable. Those of us who haven't done enough. Yeah. Anything else on this issue?
Well, we have in the chat, Laura Thayer's asking if you can speak about is where is the voice coming from, Welty's original title.
She had a number of titles. It's from a Jackson Interior was one. I have to go back and look up, but it was not the original one. It's the one they finally came to. So she revised the title several times.
And I'll mention at this moment that the Eudora Welty House and Garden has a new permanent exhibit unveiled about the making of this story. So if this conversation interests you and you want to come and look at that, you can see old drafts and revisions and words that were marked out and changed. It just kind of walks you through that.
Let me also add that the Welty Digital Archive at the Mississippi Department of Archives and History also has the story in its various revisions available digitally, and you can look at those. So you can just go to the Mississippi Department of Archives website, click on that, and then you can find the changes that were made, including the title changes. All right, what about this? This is very unusual for her to use a contemporary event. She didn't usually do that. Why do you think that's happened? Do you think she negotiates that successfully? That use of drawing so directly on a specific event, but turning it into fiction. What about the issue of fiction? Why is fiction the way to deal with this rather than nonfiction? Any defenders of fiction here? Yeah, Teresa. Oh, and there's Minrose. Oh, good.
I think fiction is the best way to deal with it, because if it was just like reality, then people would react, to defend the reality if that was of their leaning. But when it's fiction, people will say, "Oh, that's not right." So it's a way to get audience buy-in, I think.
Okay. Minrose. This is Minrose Gwen, who wrote this book, Remembering Medgar Evers. So we have, let's see, and her book does address this question very directly. Go ahead, Minrose. Welcome. Oh, we're not hearing you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. I think one of the things I would just add to the discussion is that I think Welty was looking for answers to the questions that many of us ask, and that is, where does racist hatred and violence come from? Literally asking that question in the title. And so I think that fiction is a vehicle for that in a way that nonfiction would not be. Also, the fact that she was writing it at that moment, it had to be fiction. It really had to be, because nonfiction would have prejudiced the jury. Not that the jury wasn't already prejudiced, all white men, but she made so many of the revisions because she didn't want to prejudice the jury and change the names, as you pointed out, Suzanne. So I think there are several reasons for fiction as opposed to nonfiction, but one of them is necessity.
Yeah, right. For the legal issues. Let's talk about some of the changes that she made. Jackson, Mississippi becomes Thermopylae. Why Thermopylae? What is the advantage of having that as the name of the town? So they said you can't set this in Jackson, Mississippi. So now we have Thermopylae. Medgar Evers becomes Roland Summers. Why Roland Summers? What about those two changes? Anyone want to speculate? I bet Marcia would if I. Oh, here's Pearl, huh? No, I lost that with Pearl.
I'm here. Can you see me?
Yes.
Hear me. I don't care about seeing me, but hearing me. I want to go back first to about why fiction. First of all, the supposedly the factual account would be in the newspapers, and everyone on that side knew that the newspapers were only going to report a part of it. So you have to go to fiction to find out. And then to me, fiction is always about ambiguity. And so that allows the reader and Welty to explore this event based on the few facts that we had. And to me, when I read the story and when I've taught it, this ambiguity allows, I mean, it seems terrible to say, but allows me to begin to try to understand and empathize with the assassin, to hear his loneliness, his anger, his fear of the whites losing their power. And so to me, that first person point of view opens a huge door to think about the racists that were doing this kind of act.
Yeah, where does the racism come from? And
Yeah.
he has a sort of typically Southern attitude, like, I'm doing it for my own pure dissatisfaction. But it's very clear that his ideas have been shaped by the newspapers. He doesn't want to acknowledge that, but they have. And the Jackson newspapers, and Minrose talks about this in her book, were horrible. You ought to go to newspapers.com and read the columns that were in the paper in 1963. It's just unbelievable from this point of time to look at those. And so, the sort of economic sense of Medgar Evers, Roland Summers has a car. He's got green grass. His wife keeps the electricity on late at night. He has a wife who loves him. That sense of being disadvantaged and wanting to be above, at least one person I can be above is the black man. And then he hasn't ever had his picture taken.
And then at the end, I mean, this is where it comes full circle. His mother has wanted him to come back home, just to come back home.
Yeah.
And he doesn't have that family feeling. And he takes the guitar down and sings a down, a down, a down, a down, a down. So, I mean, that first person point of view to me allows the ambiguity and allows the fictional exploration of why such a person existed to commit this terrible act. And then change it to Thermopylae and Roland Summers opens it all up to history, how one person can make change.
Thermopylae, literally hot gates, a battle where the Athenians held off the Persians, the Greek forces, not Athenians, Spartans, held off the Persian forces, but ultimately were betrayed. The betrayal of Edwards, Roland, the Song of Roland, the French epic poem Hero, who is betrayed, and Evers cast in a kind of heroic light, I think. The reference to heat, the hatred, the hate-filled world, so hot. So those allusions coming into play.
Kennedy had his hand up. I don't know if you still have
I
a
think
comment.
it was
Mr.
Gilbert maybe had his hand up. No,
Because I was gonna refer to the hot gates, Thermopylae, and the Song of Roland as well. The question that I had in mind as I noted those was, who's the one standing in the breach?
Yeah.
Is it Beckwith fighting against the changes that are coming over him, or is it the martyrs, the good martyrs who died at both those places? So it seems like that metaphor can flip.
Pearl's point about ambiguity there. I mean, certainly the murderer would see himself as the one standing in the breach at the gate, but the gate could be to a better world, a newer society, and the betrayal of the leader. I think that the ambiguity here does not excuse the assassin, but it explains that the assassin is part of a larger social order. He is acting as a representative of a larger social order, which is guilty as he is, so that he's not the only guilty one. Right. Anything else in the story? Any other details in the story? We have Nathan B. Forrest Drive instead of Delta Drive, founder of the Ku Klux Klan. That's not too ambiguous. Pearl, and then Marcia.
Sarah Ford makes a great point about the heat. You have thermopylae, you have the thermostat, you have the heat on the bank sign, and this raises the emotions and the anger, all of that. So thank you, Sarah, for pointing that particular thing out.
And let me point out that Welty intensified the heat. I went back and looked up to see what the temperature was. It was hot, but it wasn't that hot. So she has intensified that pattern of heat. Yeah. Marcia.
I appreciate the comment that introducing the name and making the place name Thermopylae is very much setting it into a historical context, that this is bigger than just the story of, or not bigger, but more representative than just a story of one place and one point of time. It sets it in a historical setting and suggests that you look at it in the context of a whole history. But I was also thinking about the technique she uses. It's part of her modernism. I always go back to the style of the writing, and one of the aspects of modernism is telling a story through the mind of the characters. And I appreciate the way here she was getting to be an older woman and very much still working in a style that was not all that common, not that all that known by ordinary people. And of course, it's in the New Yorker, which is not exactly ordinary people, but it does show her forward thinking, the way she has always been pushing the envelope of realist style to go into something beyond just this happened, what happened when and how, and to show you the underpinnings of it by telling a story through the mind of a person. It's very much modernism.
Yes, and also that the business of Thermopylae, opening the story out, making it more widely representative. And I think of fiction, and what Pearl was saying earlier, fiction and Minrose more generally as dealing with a truth that can be obscured by the facts, as a way of getting at a truth that cannot be told just by a kind of factual account. So what else about this story? What other aspects of the story would you like to discuss?
In the chat, I'm seeing some comments about the power of the incredibly short length. And I'm also seeing comments about the involvement of the media in the role of the story.
Yeah. So yeah, the story is powerful for being short, I think. Yeah. It's powerful for being a confession, I think. And people have talked about, who is he talking to? Who is this man talking to? So he's got to tell somebody, he says, and he tries to tell his wife. She doesn't really want to hear it. She finds some way I don't get the credit, he says. So who do you think he's talking to here? My view is that that the reader is brought into the story in this way, that he's confessing to the reader, but that may not be what you think. Pearl.
Well, Noel, this is Noel Polk's reading on it. He wants us to believe that he's been arrested and that he's making this confession, which is not a confession. It's a boast of a confession to the police or to the police station. So it's nice to imagine Byron de la Beckwith today, held in the cell, and but he's boasting.
I remember that Noel said that, but I've never found that convincing. That that he's been arrested and confessing. But I do think it's a confession, and I think I'm the one hearing it, and it's saying, Suzanne Mars, have you spoken up when you need to?
Yeah.
Yeah. Any other suggestions about that? What about that guitar that he takes down and plays? A down, 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 a down, down, down. What do you make of that ending of the story? John Hennigan, you're not going to speak to me? You don't have to answer that question if you don't want to. I just want to hear your voice.
There, am I on? Can you hear me?
Yeah, we
Yes.
can.
Okay. I tell you what the ending reminded me of is the lines that are on the second page of the collected book, the collected works, where after he shot Summers or Roland, the shooter says he was down.
Yeah.
And so I tied it, to me, I was tying it back to that. And I think it seems to me that he's trying to explain, maybe even to himself, why he did it. And what his motivation was. I think his wife is somewhat of a foil, because without her, with her, he has more of a dialogue that he can engage in, and she brings in a number of outside things that we're not aware of, which is like the newspaper, and that the local newspaper definitely has a role in influencing his views about what society might condone, and which reminds, and I'm referring to where she says, didn't the fella keep drumming it in? What a good idea. The one that writes a column every day. It made me think of Jimmy Ward. And it also made me think of what we're going to cover next week, which is Bob Dylan's song, Only a Pawn in Their Game, and which seems to me to be very much what a number of these people who did this sort of thing, the killer doesn't ever seem to acknowledge that that killing is not going to solve this problem, and it makes me wonder if in the end, is it just a matter of ego for him that he's going to do something that he sees as inevitable, and he wants to be the one to do it, and he doesn't understand that the consequences are self-defeating.
Of the fact of the heat, it's still hot. Everything is hot.
Yes.
But I like what you pointed out there, that when he shoots Roland Summers, he was down. And then at the end of the story, it's sing a down, 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 a down. And when he says he was down, it comes right after this picture of the blood, and there's a kind of horror almost on his part. And then he takes it as triumph. And he was down, and I'm on top, you're down. But at the end, the down seems to me to be the self-destructive quality of his act, that he has destroyed not only Summers, but he's destroying himself. He's destroying a viable social possibility for a viable social order. Everything is down. I don't know what you all think about that. Anne. Whoops, we can't hear you, Anne.
There we go. Dr. Morris, when you were talking earlier, somebody asked, or maybe you asked the question, well, who is the narrator addressing? And I think I'm correct. I'm reading from the collection. Towards the end of the story on page 607, she says, everybody, colon, I don't get you nowhere to take nothing from nobody unless you make sure it's for peace, for good and all, forever and amen. It appears to me that that's a way of addressing there. Do you think?
I'm not finding that, to read the
It's that,
passage.
okay, it's on the last page of the story, and it's I would say maybe a third of the way down there.
Mhm.
And
731 in the Library of America.
oh, thank you. Pearl, do you see where I'm talking about?
Yeah, it's the bottom of 731.
Okay, I won't be sorry to see them brickbats.
No, everybody colon.
Everybody colon.
Okay, it don't get you nowhere to take nothing from nobody unless you make for sure it's for keeps, for good and all, forever and amen. So you're thinking he's addressing a general public here.
Well, when the sentence starts out with everybody colon, am
Yeah.
I, you know,
Yeah. Or yeah, it could be literally everybody, or it could
uh-huh.
be that's a mode of speech, I think. Yeah. Go ahead, Jessica.
Well, I'm sadly here to say that we are out of time. And if you are getting your emails forwarded to you from a friend, be sure to sign up to info@eudoraweltyhouse.com. Email me, sign up. That'll be the best way to ensure you get not only the Zoom link, but the recordings, which will be in the email next Friday. You'll get the recording to this session. And also in that same email,
Go ahead.
in that same email, you will.
I'm just going to give Minrose the last word, but you go ahead.
Okay, and yes, and in that same email, you will get the resources that we'll be discussing next week, Micah and Only a Pawn in Their Game by Margaret Walker and Bob Dylan, respectively. All right, Minrose.
I forgot to talk about the reference to Birmingham and the narrators attributing violence to African Americans rather to himself, but we'll talk about that next time too. Now, Minrose.
Oh, thank you. I enjoyed this so much. Thank you so much, Suzanne. This was very interesting, and I'm happy to revisit some of this information. When we were putting together the Norton Anthology of Southern Literature, I did the Welty piece, and we had this story in there. And one of the things that we found out in our research was that song at the end is actually a very, very ancient song for an elegy for a fallen knight, Knight. And if Welty didn't know this, and there's no way to know whether she did or not, it's such an irony, because here's the assassin saying, singing this elegy for the person he has just killed in a night. So I thought that was an interesting aspect of the song.
I would bet money that she knew it.
I bet so too.
and that's a very interesting thing, the irony of that.
Yes.
But also the fact that he may be singing it for himself and seeing himself as that fallen knight.
I don't know.
Right. Okay, Jessica, I promise to shut up. Here we go.
Oh, well, that's all. Rachel, you're clear to end the meeting for us. Thank you so much, Rachel at MDAH, for recording this meeting, and thanks to everybody. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.